Hello and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Lisa Ann Butcher. We're doing a show today that's, I think, going to be very helpful for a lot of people. We're going to be talking about divorce and redefining your family. And joining us today is Allison Jones. And I don't normally read anything, but I'm actually going to read because Allison has an amazing history that I'd like to make sure I get correct. So, Allison Jones is a registered clinical counselor, she's a family therapist, parenting coordinator, mediator, collaborative law divorce coach, and a child specialist. She's located in Vancouver and is the clinical director of her company, Allison Jones and Associates. She is a highly respected business owner, highly respected, I have to say, in my business of knowing her professionally in terms of she's often Supreme Court appointed to see many high conflict families going through divorce. And she's a best-selling author as well. She has over 30 years of experience, which I think is amazing, especially when you're going to her for her services in the field of individual, couple, or family counseling. She draws on a background of parenting education as well as developmental psychology and family systems. So welcome to the show today, Allison Jones.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, we're going to be talking about divorce and redefining our family. This is such an important topic, I have to say, because so many people deal with this. Obviously, it's not our go-to thought as we get married. Everyone thinks we can kind of stay together and we're going to build a family, and this is obviously ideal. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit today, Allison, and welcome you here. I'm so thankful to have you on the show today. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, I'm pleased to be on the show, and thank you for asking. Um, and I'm always pleased to talk about this topic. It's an important topic, and basically, almost 50% of marriages end in divorce. So it's something we do need to be having conversations about.
Mhm. It's interesting, isn't it? 50, and they say 50%. And actually, it's interesting though. I'm sure that's the statistic, but I find so many people tell me that they actually don't know of a family that's together. There's many kids I see in my practice specifically, and they'll say, "Well, I'm actually the only one with parents who are together," or every single person on my block has divorced parents. And I think there's so many different types of families now that it's a super important topic to talk about, specifically because this comes up a lot when we talk about communication, right? And how does divorce affect kids? A lot of people will tell me, well, it's better to stay in a marriage. Divorce really affects kids. I kind of want to start with that. What is your thought about that? If we can look at sort of, is divorce always bad for children?
No, it's not actually. Children are incredibly resilient and they can bounce back from divorce. And there's lots of different things that can be put in place that help them bounce back quicker. But the reality is that children are not, um, you know, irreparably damaged from divorce. Staying in a marriage where it's a toxic environment can be more harmful and challenging to children than separating and giving them two happy homes. Um, we can't pretend that it doesn't have an impact. It will have an impact. And it's like a wound, right? Divorce is a wound. And wound is a natural thing. We get wounded in life by many different things, but it's a wound that, given the right environment, can heal, given the right treatment, can heal. So when a wound is healed, it might leave a scar, but our scars are interesting things about us. So, in no way is divorce bad necessarily for children if it is allowed to heal and they are allowed to grow from it.
That's such an interesting way of looking at it. And I have not thought of it that way before, but you're right about that wound and the wound kind of needing time to heal. Um, can you speak a little bit about the things that, let's say, open up that wound or add salt to a wound? Let's talk about communication for a second. So what are the things that parents do that maybe add salt to a wound in terms of their communication to their child about the divorce?
Right. Yeah, there are definitely things that are going to help heal the wound and things that are going to make it worse and could potentially even create toxicity. And that's what we're most concerned about, right? In the sense when a wound goes toxic, it can be very, very threatening, can even be life threatening. And the reality is the things that are going to really hurt children and are going to make that wound worse are going to be when the parents are disparaging each other, when the children are witnessing a lot of conflict and yelling and name calling, when the children feel like the arguments and the fights are about them, that they're focused on them, not just on, the parents fighting about, we have a financial issue that it hasn't been settled, right? And so there are things that definitely make that wound worse, and then there's things that make it better. And the things that make it better, are giving that airplay, right? Giving air to a wound makes it better. Getting the dirt out, getting the things out that are getting in the way, and then giving it some air, letting the children basically know that what they feel makes sense, that you understand them, and that by expressing themselves and by having the appropriate support and treatment, that it can heal.
Yeah, is that something you see a lot? So when kids come into your practice, and maybe just describe your practice a little bit. So you have a team in
Yeah.
Vancouver, and so and I know, I mean, I've come across you professionally. Obviously, Allison is often Supreme Court appointed to see children and their families. So describe a little bit about what your practice does and what your team does, and what you see every day, sort of as your general client.
Right. Well, I'm in a unique situation in the sense that I see the best of and worst of cases, right? And I have seen and assisted families in the absolute best of ways to be able to do divorce, right? And where their children have not just survived, thrived in that environment, where they have great attached relationships with both parents, where they're feeling loved and supported. They have two safe harbors in the world. And I have one case I still think about where, the parents worked so well and so cooperatively together. And every Sunday when they did the exchange, they would have a family brunch, and they would update all together, the two children and the parents, on how the week went. And that was a very cooperative divorce. And those children they did wonderful, right? And they saw their parents go on and have other relationships that were really successful and happy, right? But on the other side, like I said, I see the best and the worst. We also serve a lot of that. We have some high conflict programs that serve clients that are often court ordered to see us. And the court has often ordered them either because the conflict has become so high and damaging to the children, or that it has affected and impaired the relationship between maybe a parent and child. So there might be some parent child contact issues going on. And then we have a program where we work with the whole family, both parents and all the children, on trying to, frankly, get the dirt out of that wound, give it some space to heal, get it treated properly, covered properly, and then let it heal. And we do that through what we call restorative conversations. So, we dig into some of the hurts that have happened, and we air them out, and we get appropriate apologies and appropriate behavior now from the parents. And we do this in a supported environment where, the parents are guided in what might actually help their children here. It's not a punishment. It's actually a resource for the parents.
Mm.
But sometimes they haven't recognized yet they need it, but the court recognized they needed it.
It's interesting you say that about the differences, right? Where one can have, a really cohesive, working together family post divorce, and then another one can be very high conflict. And I always jump myself sort of in my own practice, where people will say, well, a high conflict marriage is much worse for the kids than a low conflict divorce. And I always think those are so dichotomous, because a high conflict marriage doesn't normally lend itself to a low conflict divorce. And I think that's sort of a piece that people miss, is that if you're in a high conflict marriage, the chances are you're going to be in a high conflict divorce as well. Sometimes it works the other way too, where you have a low conflict marriage, but it's just not sort of what you were expecting, or there are some fundamental issues, and then people leave, and then it's this really, really high conflict divorce that does affect children the way that you've said. I love that your practice works on that with people and actually gets them to a place where we can see them learn to be resilient and learn to be functioning and actually redefining their family. It's such an important contribution, I find, especially to this area, because a lot of people, especially in counseling, avoid this area. I have to say there are not a lot of practices that will even take children of divorced families because they want to stay out of court. They don't want to get involved. And I think that's really sad, actually, because I think it's very sad to watch what happens to the kids when there isn't the support there.
That is a great point, Lisa. And and I always say that, you know, because if you're not going to see children, like, yes, you should have appropriate trainings and supports and whatnot as the therapist. But if you're not going to see children that are going, that's families going through a divorce or are divorced, you're not going to see half of the children that need to be seen, right? And the way I've always looked at it is this. Some people say to me, Alison, why do you work in this field? It's really challenging. Because it is challenging. But I'm like, it would be like if I was walking along the street and I saw a child wounded on the side of the street. Could I keep walking? Could I just keep walking and ignore that child? I couldn't. That child needs assistance, right? And so I believe very strongly in that we need to meet clients where they're at and help them, pave a better path, but we need to meet them there. There's no way I could leave that child sitting on the edge of the street crying and wounded. I can't do that in my practice either. I can't, right? If I know children are being hurt by this situation, if there's anything I can do to help those parents improve that situation, I'm going to do it. And sometimes talking to them and getting them on board and seeing what's happening. Like, a lot of times the parents don't see the damage that's being done. And if you can convey that to them and help them see it, they love their kids, right? Once you can get them on that path where, like, they really love their kids, they're going to move the world to try to make things better. So that's where we can improve things. Definitely.
It's interesting. One of the tips I give in my practice to parents who have come to look to kind of redefine their family after divorce is that to put a picture of your children in your phone under your ex-spouse's name so that every time you go to text him or her, you see your children's faces. And I think it's a good way of stopping yourself from saying something that might be inflammatory or high conflict or just a different way than would get you to the point that you're trying to get to. And I think it's a really good reminder just to see your kids' faces. And people always like that tip. I think it's a good one. What are some other tips that you give? What kind of tips do you give parents in terms of communicating with their ex-spouse through divorce?
Well, that they really need to have their own channels of communication, right? First of all, not through the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not appropriate to be communicating things, sending things, having your kids as messengers. In this day and age, with all the apps and all the alternatives we have, there are many ways for parents to communicate that can keep children out of the equation. Also, children want to know, they want to feel secure in that their parents are still doing their job. And their job is to parent them and to make decisions and to work together to grow them up. And so you want to show, like, it's okay to say your kids, thank you for letting me know that's how you feel about that. I'm going to be talking to your dad about that. I'll follow up with him on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not together. That's actually a very powerful statement for kids. Oh, okay, mom and dad are talking. They are figuring out a way. And kids will find cracks. Like, if there's cracks in the system, and it's not because they're trying to be naughty, it's because it's the way they find security. If there's a crack, they're kind of showing us there's a crack and what they're actually wanting us to fill that crack. So they want a foundation where they feel that they can rely on their parents, and they can, that their parents can still parent them, set limits, right? Like, another thing with parents is, don't give up parenting, right? Like, you still need to set limits. You still need to follow through and be consistent, even if your ex is doing things differently, right? Like, you can say to your kids, I understand you have different roles in mom's house, dad's house, mom's dad's house. Like, that's okay. But in this house, this is how we do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you just brought that up because communicating with an ex is often very difficult for people, and there's sometimes becomes this competition thing that is strange that happens in divorce, where someone's trying to make one house better than the other person's house. And something I hear all the time in my office from people is, and it's always from adults, and they'll always say, in my ex's house, there's no rules. They don't have to do anything. They don't cook them proper meals. They, have no expectations. And the sort of dichotomy that they try and create is that in their house, it's super structured. They're fed properly. They get to school on time. And in this house, it's a total disaster. And this is the problem. And I often point out, it's actually the dichotomy between that that's the problem. It's that the kids have no consistency whatsoever. And there's this competition of whose house is better. Kids don't need to hear, oh, well, of course, mom gave you that. She always used to cook, frozen chicken fingers. Thankfully you're here now and you can have steak dinner. And, kids don't need to hear that. They have this, they actually will protect often the person that they feel is being put down. And that's something I see often in kids. Do you see that a lot, where they feel like they're sort of protecting one parent over the other because one of the parents is being detrimental towards the other one in front of them?
Yes, and they will do that, and it'll even go, and what ends up really becoming problematic is when it goes that step further where they are now feeling caught in a loyalty conflict, right? Like there's the protection, and then there's like, oh, I've got to not just protect this parent, I have to show that I'm loyal to them.
Mm.
And to be loyal to them, I have to take a stance against the other parent. And when children get caught in loyalty conflicts, it's always problematic for them. It's always hurtful for them. So that's one of the tips. One of the things we really want to keep at the forefront is don't put your child in a position where they're going to feel loyal to you. They're going to feel disloyal to their other parent. That is a lose-lose situation for a child. The win-win situation for a child is that even if the other parent does things differently than you do, that they can still feel that they can be loyal to them, they can be loyal to you, they can adapt even if there are different rules in each home. Of course, it's great if we have, the more consistency we have, the better, the easier to get those values across to kids. But even if you can't get that consistency that you would like to have, it doesn't mean that you have to put your kid in a loyalty conflict. You can still manage your home and help them understand that these are the rules that they need to follow when they're with you.
Mhm. It's such a good point. Such a good point. How do you feel about step parenting in terms of a role with the child? So this is something that often comes up in my practice is the role of the step parent and what that should be in terms of making rules or enforcing rules or that kind of thing. This is often something that causes conflict between parents themselves because the step parent is involved in a way that one parent doesn't feel that they should be. And it's also something I have to say that I see as being very impactful to kids. I have rarely, if ever, heard a child say that they appreciate the involvement of their step parent unless there's an absence of their original parent. So, could you comment on that?
Yeah, it's complicated in some ways,
Mm,
right? Because your a step parent is still an adult in the house,
mhm.
right? It's not like you're a visitor. And
Right.
it's if you're living together, it's not like it's not your home. So you still need to be involved with setting the atmosphere, setting the standards, the limits that are okay within your home. But it's about stepping in and in anything that feels competitive or trying to take on the parent role. It's always very important to say to your children, you only have, you know, in the end, you might have other step parents, but you've got one mom, one dad, or you might have one mom, one dad, right? Like, and the others can be your step parents. The others can be adults that love you, are cheering you on and appreciate you. But this is not a competition, and nobody's ever replacing anybody. These can be additional resources for you. But so it is this thing where, in the end, when it comes to setting those limits and disciplining, it's better if the actual parent can step up there and not just leave it to the step parent. But it is also important that the step parent has a say in how the home is managed and what limits are set and
Mm.
what consequences are to certain actions, right?
Mhm.
They
I
still
heard
need.
something really interesting a few years ago from a parenting coordinator that's local in Kelowna, and she was talking about sort of the triggering nature of to her when working with kids of a parent saying that this is my parenting time or your parenting time or this is my time or your time. And she actually said, and it stuck with me, she said, it to me it's not about my time or your time, it's about the children's time wherever they
Mhm.
are. And one thing that she said that stuck out to me was she said that you always have to think about it in terms of what the child's experience is, and that even if someone is being parented 50% of the time in one home and 50% of the time in the other home, the non-custodial parent during that time is still their parent 100% of the time. So just because they're with dad for their 50% doesn't mean that their mom is not their mother. And I think same thing the other way around. If someone's with their mom, and that doesn't mean that they don't have that dad is still their dad 100% of the time. And I think it's something to keep in mind when people are getting divorced. It's okay, to have new partners and to repartner and all those things, but really to keep in mind the fundamental point, which is doing what is right for the kids. And some kids, they might not be bothered by certain dynamics, but some kids certainly are. And I think it's really important for us as parents to put that aside and look at what is actually working for our kids.
The thing is that I always say, the gold ticket is, right? The gold ticket, and we'd love our kids to have the gold ticket, is having a well attached relationship with both parents, right? And so to your point, that idea that your relationship with your parent is always honored and protected no matter where you are. And if we can facilitate, like you're doing such a gift to your children if you're helping facilitate and support their attachment with the other parent, because there's no doubt about it. Like the stats show us this strong. Children who have well attached relationships with both parents, right? That's the golden ticket. It doesn't matter if those well attached relationships are from an intact family or a divorced family. See, that's not like that part's secondary. The number one thing is that it is that they're well attached to both parents, that they have good relationships with both parents. It doesn't have to be perfect, by the way. This is not a competition. It's okay to have issues with your parent. What kid ever went through adolescence and didn't have an issue with their parents, right? Like, it doesn't mean it's like all or nothing here. It's like you can be annoyed with your parent and still have a good attachment with them,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
You know?
Can you speak a little bit on just on the, in sort of a final point? Because I'm sure some people are hearing that saying, well, what if you have a parent who's an addict, or what if you have a parent who was violent towards the kids and things like that? Can we speak to that a little bit? Is it important for a child to have a relationship or an understanding of that parent, even if they are not a good influence on that child?
That's a really good question, and of course, it's a tough one, right? Like if a parent is posing a safety risk to their child, safety has to come first,
Mm-hmm.
and that needs to be assessed. You need the appropriate authorities to be involved, right? If there's been family violence, right, we need, police involvement to have that understood too. You might need to be protection orders, etc., right? If there's addiction and it's an active addiction, then that could potentially be risky to the child. Now, if that parent has sought treatment and they've been clean and sober now for some time and are doing all the appropriate things to support that, contact with their child can be very good for the child, as long as it's a safe environment. If you can't have contact with your child, if the child can't have contact with their parent for safety reasons, then it's important to help the child understand, why and what's happening. Because if it's left just a big blank, kids will fill that with, negative perceptions of themselves. Oh, my dad doesn't see me because he doesn't care about me, as opposed to explaining to them what addiction is and how it operates in the brain and how some people really struggle with this, and that it's not that daddy doesn't love you or mommy doesn't love you. It's that this is, a problem that they're dealing with right now, and so you, as carefully and kindly as possible, help explain it to the child. And that's where
It's
getting counseling can be a great thing too. Having a counselor involved that can also give that messaging or guide you on how to give that messaging.
It's so important, isn't it? Because that's part of what we talk about as counselors is boundaries and setting boundaries with that parent, and that kind of even reintegration sometimes, and I find what often happens is one parent will have a lot of anger or resentment towards the other parent for obviously being violent or being addicted and not being present in certain ways, and that maybe was the result or the reason that the divorce occurred. And then that one parent is very, very quick to sort of dismiss that other parent as, yep, you're gone. That's it. Now we're in this life together, myself and this child. And interestingly, what you hear from the children is they still have an interest in that bond and they still want to know that person often. And so it's really hard as a parent to step back. And I see this every day, as I'm sure you do too, to step back and, create that safety for the child, without sort of talking down about the other person or without being detrimental to the child about the other parent. And I think that's such a huge thing. It's something as parents we have to really work at, because obviously our own feelings are very valid to everything that happened to us, but there's also the child's perspective, which is not always shared. And that's the interesting part, right? How we feel about our ex-spouses if we're divorced is not at all how our children often feel about them as well. So I think that's something to remember.
That's right, and we have to distinguish between those two things, right? What are our own feelings and thoughts going on in our own experiences and our children? And this is where things start to get troublesome, is when parents can't separate those two, when they can't separate their own experiences from their child's. And so it's a hard thing to do sometimes, but it's a very important thing to do. And that's also one of the things that leads to these more high conflict situations, is if you're still in a storm, if you're in an emotional storm still, reeling from your relationship, and it continues on even after the marriage has ended and you're living in different homes, that can really contribute to a high conflict situation if you're not aware of how maybe the things you're saying come out as very disparaging.
Definitely. So, in terms of if I'm watching this as a parent or a child and I am wanting to get in touch with you or your team, or I am maybe a counselor and I'm looking to refer someone to someone, let's say in Vancouver, how would one get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, we people can get a hold of us by either going to our website, checking us out there, and it's AlisonJones.ca. Easy, my name,
Okay.
right? ALISONJONES.ca. And our phoning us, we have an administrator who's happy to help when people call and make sure that they get the right service. And our number is 604-926-6665. That's 926-6665. And we're always happy and willing to, help people sort through what they may need in this situation. And, you know, like I said, we're quite able to serve from, of course, we're happy those cases that things are going really well. There's still lots of good things we can do.
Mhm.
And one of the really good things we can do sometimes is, if you're contemplating divorce, I
Hmm.
really encourage people to talk to us first, because we can give you the language of how to talk to your children about that. And that can save you a whole lot down the line. So,
That is excellent. Wow. I'm so glad you put that in. I'm really glad for you to have mentioned that. I think that's so helpful for people because, they don't even know how to even begin that conversation. And I think sort of that is something that kids all will often say to me that one of their pivotal moments is the moment that their kids or that their parents told them that they were getting divorced. So how great would that be to be able to have the language around that would be supportive to your child as they grow.
it is a conversation they never forget. So I
Mhm.
really try to encourage parents, if we can start from there and do it right, like, you're going to mitigate so many challenges ahead. And so, honestly, within 1 to 2 sessions, some of the best work we've done, is when we've hardly even worked with families in the sense that we've prepared them properly on that end. And there's a lot of good work that can be done very quickly in regard to that. And
Perfect.
and cost efficient too, right?
True, exactly. Well, thank you
Mhm.
so much for joining us today. If you or anyone else who's watching would like to get in touch with either Allison or ourselves at Three Sisters Counseling, please head to her website, AllisonJones.ca, and Allison is spelled with a Y. Or you can go to our website at threesisterscounseling.com or give us a call at 778-222-7778, and we can direct you either to her or to our team and help you. And thank you so much for joining us today, Allison. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Thanks so much. And thank you, everyone, for watching.